years, Donald Trump did everything in his power to try to make people fear us. I want to know, who's going to tell him that the job he's currently seeking might just be one of those black jobs?
We will elect Kamala Harris as the next president of the United States, and Tim Walz as the next vice president of the United States. We will elect leaders up and down the ballot who will fight for the hopeful, forward-looking America we all believe in. And together, we too will build a country that is more secure and more just, more equal, and more free. So let's get to work.
Major star power at the Democratic National Convention, Barack and Michelle Obama taking center stage in Chicago, while Kamala Harris's running mate Tim Walz prepares for his own big address to the convention hall later tonight. The Minnesota governor and vice president now the official nominees after an energized, music-filled roll call of the states. Night 2 proving to be a hard act to follow, where the Obamas made their own case for Harris as she continues the movement they started. And both delivered takedowns of former President Donald Trump. Here to discuss from Chicago, The Hill's staff writer, Niall Stanage. Niall, thanks for coming on. Democrats really leaning in on these two very charismatic speakers there that loom large in their party. You were in the convention hall last night. What are your big takeaways?
Well, I mean, obviously the atmosphere and the reception the Obamas received was rapturous for both of them. I mean, the former First Lady is obviously a very fine orator in her own right and very beloved within the Democratic Party. Former President Obama, I mean, his record speaks for himself. I did think it was interesting just how much of an impact the speeches had. Really, everyone who spoke last night was overshadowed in a big way by the Obamas. And I thought it was interesting that Michelle Obama took the fight to former President Trump a bit more directly than her husband did. Admittedly, she didn't name Trump for the first part of her speech, but it was very plain that she was painting him as a figure of privilege, a figure of selfishness, and contrasting that with people from more modest backgrounds like herself and like Vice President Harris.
Michelle certainly took the gloves off when she went directly after Trump in her speech, her husband not shying away either. How do you think history will judge this moment, these back-to-back speeches from the Obamas?
You know, I think the speeches will be judged well, honestly, in terms of the overall sweep of the convention and the broader election campaign. At this point in time, it's such a divided country. Obviously, Democrats have received a lot of very direct hits from former President Trump and his allies. So I don't think there's any suggestion, really, that this was too aggressive by the Obamas or anything like that. I think they effectively made the case. They framed it within a larger narrative, and I think they were effective speeches.
Some are even saying Michelle Obama delivered one of the most powerful speeches seen at a political convention in modern memory. Anderson Cooper, for one, called it the most powerful speech he ever heard. How much weight do her words carry? Was this a speech aimed at energizing the base or more to bring in those fence-sitters?
So I think with the base, she is particularly potent. I mean, we know that, for example, a lot of Democrats entertained a kind of fantasy that she would run for elected office herself. She has no interest in doing that, but it was something that was rumoured a lot when there was the big crisis around President Biden and whether he would run again. In terms of independence, I think that two things. Firstly, former President Obama continues to be broadly popular. I know he's always been a figure who's been targeted by Conservatives and got a lot of criticism from Conservatives, but he remains very popular with independents as well as Democrats. The same is largely true of Michelle Obama. She, obviously is a best-selling author. She sells out big arenas when she does book events. So I think both of them do have actually some capacity to reach out toward the middle ground as well as energizing their base.
Now, on the very evening the Obamas spoke, Donald Trump shared some surprisingly positive thoughts about them during a brief interview on CNN. He said he respects the Obamas and even called Barack Obama, quote, a nice gentleman. This is such a stark contrast to Trump's many insults, his attacks in years past. What's going on here, Niall? Is there a strategy in place, or is this just Trump talking?
Well, partly it's just impossible to ever predict exactly what is behind former President Trump's actions or words. But I do think here he probably wants to keep the focus on Vice President Harris and, to a degree, Governor Walz, her running mate. There isn't really a whole lot of dividend for Trump in getting into a public fighting match with the Obamas. Yes, it would appeal to his base. That base is very critical of the Obamas, but that's not the ground on which the election is going to be ultimately decided. And as we were just talking about, the Obamas are pretty popular. So I think from Trump's perspective, he doesn't necessarily want to get distracted by a war of words with either Barack or Michelle Obama. He wants to really take his fight and jabs as much as possible directly at Kamala Harris.
And on tap tonight for day 3 of the DNC is Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, his big address. But it comes as he and his wife are under some scrutiny from Republicans for their personal story they share on IVF, especially with reproductive rights, a major theme in this year's election. Niall, what are we expecting to hear from Walz?
From Governor Walz, I think we'll hear a version of his story that portrays him very much as within the American mainstream and a voice of the heartland. It's notable that Vice President Harris often refers to him as Coach Walz, talking about his past as a high school football coach, a kind of framing that is intended to really underline his sort of everyday appeal. Now, the controversy that you're talking about has taken off in conservative circles. I'm not sure it has much legs beyond that. It's really a debate about the exact type of treatment that Gwen Walz underwent. Do people who aren't already, committed one side or the other care, politically speaking, about these distinctions with the exact form of fertilization treatment? I'm not convinced that they do.
Bill Clinton is another headliner coming up, giving his 12th convention speech later tonight. What's his role within the Democratic Party right now, and what are party leaders hoping he can achieve tonight?
So Bill Clinton has always been good at trying to explain or advocate for democratic policies to a broad public and to people who don't necessarily follow every twist and turn of politics. Having said that, I do think some of the luster that used to be on Bill Clinton's reputation has come off in more recent years. Partly that is because he represented a very centrist politics within the Democratic Party, and a lot of times recently we've seen the energy with the more progressive wing. But also you can never separate Bill Clinton from the scandal that in many ways defined his presidency over the affair with Monica Lewinsky. Obviously that was a massive controversy at the time, but I think in retrospect it has come to look even worse because of the massive disparity in power between a man who was then the sitting president of the United States and a White House intern.
All right, we'll leave it there. Thank you. The Hill's Niall Stanage. Non-compete agreements nationwide were set to expire in September, but a federal judge just tossed out the ban along with other rules related to employment contracts. The Texas judge ruled the Federal Trade Commission does not, in fact, have the authority to eliminate practices it deems as unfair methods of competition by adopting broad rules. Nearly 1 in 5 Americans, an estimated 30 million people, are subject to a non-compete agreement, according to the FTC. The agreements are aimed at preventing workers from taking a new job with competitors or starting a new business in the same industry. The White House says it still supports a ban on non-compete agreements. Meanwhile, the FTC is considering a potential appeal. According to a new report from the Bureau of Labor Statistics, the U.S. economy added about 800,000 fewer jobs over the last year than initially reported. The revised report outlines that the Labor Department overestimated the number of jobs gained between March of 2023 and March of 2024. Adjustments are normal, but this revision was the largest since 2009. Experts say it could indicate the Federal Reserve may be behind on cutting interest rates. The Fed meets again to consider rate cuts on September 17th. Longtime Congressman Bill Pascrell, who spent 3 decades in Congress, has died. The New Jersey Democrat had been in the hospital in recent weeks, experiencing setbacks related to a respiratory illness. Pascrell is most known for being an advocate for first responders, especially firefighters. Later in his career, he became known for his sharp barbs against former President Donald Trump. An octogenarian, he was the second oldest House member. The grandson of Italian immigrants, he served in the Army before getting his start in politics during the late 1970s through local school boards. Pascrell had been seeking a 15th term and was favored to win. He was 87 years old. That's today's Daily Debrief. I'm Margaret Chadbourn. Be sure to like, share, and subscribe to The Hill's YouTube channel. And come back here soon for the intersection between politics and policy.